The Adeptus Mechanicus is a vital component of the Imperium of Man, holding a monopoly over technology, weapons production, and the maintenance of military infrastructure. Without their expertise and resources, the Imperial war machine would crumble, and the Imperium itself would struggle to function. However, despite their formal allegiance to the Emperor, the Adeptus Mechanicus has always maintained a high degree of autonomy. Their belief in the Omnissiah, the machine god, sets them apart from the orthodox Imperial creed, creating a deep ideological divide between Mars and Terra. A more fanatical faction within their ranks, known as the Cult Mechanicus, seeks the ultimate pursuit of technological enlightenment, even if it means defying Imperial doctrine. Some radical magi believe that the Imperium hinders their sacred mission, raising the question of their long-term loyalty to the Golden Throne. These ideological differences, combined with growing political and strategic tensions, bring forth a crucial question. Could Mars one day rise against the Imperium, and what could trigger such a conflict? The Adeptus Mechanicus is a strange and enigmatic force within the Imperium, but even stranger are the contradictions that exist within it. At its core, the Mechanicus is built on a foundation of faith in the Omnissiah, the machine god, a divine entity that grants knowledge and understanding of all things mechanical. To outsiders, this might seem like just another branch of the Imperial creed, a variation of worship that ultimately serves the Emperor. But this is where the first and most significant fracture begins. The official doctrine of the Imperium states, unequivocally, that the Emperor is the one true god of mankind. The Cult Mechanicus, however, holds a different view. To them, the Emperor is merely the physical avatar of the Omnissiah, not the true machine god itself. This might seem like a minor theological distinction, but in the Imperium, where heresy is punishable by extermination, it's a dangerous one. The Mechanicus has been able to exist with this belief largely because the Imperium needs them. Without the tech priests of Mars, there would be no weapons, no starships, no functioning infrastructure. But this uneasy truce has never erased the fundamental divide between Mars and Terra. Within the Mechanicus itself, this ideological split is even more complex. While the broader Adeptus Mechanicus functions as a quasi-religious, tech-worshipping bureaucracy dedicated to maintaining the Imperium's war machine, the Cult Mechanicus represents a far more extreme and fanatical branch. These are the true zealots of the machine god, the ones who see knowledge as the highest form of worship, and who believe that any restriction on the pursuit of technology is a sin against their faith. To them, the Imperium's rigid stance on technology, its fear of artificial intelligence, its rejection of innovation outside of sanctioned STC discoveries, is nothing less than a spiritual prison. Many within the Cult Mechanicus look at the Imperium with disdain, seeing it as a decaying empire clinging to outdated superstitions. They argue that if humanity is to ascend to its true potential, it must embrace the machine god fully, casting off the limitations imposed by the Imperium. Some radical magi go even further, whispering of a future where Mars stands apart, free from the rule of Terra. These ideas are dangerous, of course, but they are not new. The Horus Heresy showed the first major schism within the Mechanicus, when a significant portion of Mars sided with Horus and the Dark Mechanicum. Many historians and fans alike believe this event was only the beginning of a larger fracture that could one day reopen. After all, what truly binds the Mechanicus to the Imperium? There is no genetic loyalty like the Space Marines have, no deep-seated faith in the Emperor like the Ecclesiarchy. Their allegiance is one of necessity, not of devotion. Among fans of Warhammer 40k, there is endless debate over whether the Cult Mechanicus could ever lead Mars into outright rebellion. Some believe that as long as the Imperium allows them to function with relative autonomy, they have no reason to break away. But others argue that the Imperium's increasing desperation, its reliance on more radical and restrictive measures, could one day push Mars too far. There are also theories that certain factions within the Cult Mechanicus have already begun preparing for a future where Mars stands alone. The existence of secret forges deep beneath the surface of the Red Planet, the rumored development of technology far beyond what the Imperium officially allows, and the slow but undeniable expansion of Mechanicus forces outside of Imperial jurisdiction, all of these suggest that the cult Mechanicus is not as unified in its loyalty as the Imperium would like to believe. At the heart of this divide is the question of progress. The Imperium survives by stagnation, by enforcing an iron grip on its people and its technology, ensuring that nothing ever truly changes. The cult Mechanicus, for all its fanaticism, is one of the few forces within the Imperium that still seeks advancement, albeit in its own highly dogmatic way. The question is, how long can these two forces coexist before one must give way to the other? The relationship between Mars and Terra has always been complicated, defined more by necessity than by genuine unity. It's a marriage of convenience, an alliance held together by mutual dependence rather than shared ideology. For 10,000 years, the Imperium has relied on the Adeptus Mechanicus to maintain its technological backbone, while the Mechanicus has used its position to carve out a near-autonomous empire within the Imperium. But beneath the surface of this uneasy partnership lies a history of mistrust, power struggles, and philosophical rifts that could, one day, ignite into full-scale war. The tension between the two goes all the way back to the Unification Wars, before the Imperium was even born. The Emperor knew that without Mars, his dream of a galactic empire was impossible. He needed the Forge worlds, the titanic factories, the technological expertise that only the Mechanicus possessed. But Mars was never fully conquered in the way other human domains were. Instead, it was brought into the fold through negotiation, through an ancient treaty known as the Treaty of Olympus. This agreement granted the Mechanicus vast autonomy, allowing them to maintain their own laws, their own belief system, and their own military. The Mechanicus swore loyalty to the Emperor, but in truth, it was always more of an alliance than an oath of fealty. Mars remained Mars, its own power, its own purpose, its own agenda. Fast forward 10,000 years, and that tension has never truly disappeared. The Imperium is built on absolute authority, yet the Mechanicus operates under its own rule. The ecclesiarchy preaches that the Emperor is the one true God, yet the Mechanicus worships the machine god and views the Emperor as merely an avatar of its will. The Inquisition seeks to root out heresy, yet it turns a blind eye to the countless arcane rituals and secretive practices of the Mechanicus. The Imperium fears innovation, yet the Mechanicus hoards knowledge, experimenting in secret, delving into technologies that would see any other Imperial faction branded as heretical. This divide has led to the emergence of two broad factions within the Adeptus Mechanicus. On one side are the Loyalists, those who, despite their differences with the Imperium, see the survival of the Imperium as crucial to their own. These tech priests argue that while the Imperium is flawed, it is still the only thing standing between humanity and annihilation. They recognize that without the Imperium's military power, Mars would be vulnerable to Xenos invasions, chaos incursions, and internal strife. Many of these loyalists work closely with the Imperial military, supplying the Astra Militarum, the Space Marines, and even the Inquisition with weapons, vehicles, and war machines. But on the other side are those who seek independence, tech priests who believe that the Mechanicus has outgrown the Imperium, that it no longer needs to be shackled by Terran rule. These radicals argue that the Imperium, with its stagnation and its refusal to embrace technological progress, is actually holding humanity back. To them, Mars should be a beacon of knowledge, leading humanity into a new golden age of innovation, not chained to a dying empire obsessed with preserving the past. Some of these radicals whisper of a second schism of Mars, a new rebellion where the Mechanicus would finally break free from Imperial control and forge its own destiny. One of the key issues fueling this potential conflict is control over technology. The Mechanicus has always been the gatekeeper of knowledge within the Imperium, carefully rationing out technology to ensure that no other faction becomes self-sufficient. The Mechanicus doesn't just produce weapons and machines for the Imperium, it controls them. The tech priests deliberately build in fail-safes, secret protocols, and locked systems that ensure only they can fully operate or repair the Imperium's most advanced technology. Even the mighty Space Marines, with all their power, are dependent on the Mechanicus for their war gear. But the real danger lies in the knowledge that the Mechanicus refuses to share. It's no secret that the tech priests have access to forbidden technologies, devices so powerful or so dangerous that they dare not reveal them even to their Imperial allies. Deep beneath Mars, in hidden vaults and data crypts, lie secrets from the dark age of technology, secrets that could change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Some rumors suggest that the Mechanicus has already created true artificial intelligence, despite the Imperium's strict ban on such things. Others whisper of advanced weapons, warp-based technologies, and even lost STCs that could make the Mechanicus the most powerful force in the galaxy. Fans of Warhammer 40K have debated for years whether Mars is already preparing for an eventual break from the Imperium. Some point to the growing independence of the Forge worlds, many of which now operate with little oversight from Terra. Others cite the secretive nature of the Mechanicus, arguing that no one truly knows the full extent of their power. There are even theories that the Mechanicus has its own hidden army, a force of advanced war machines and cybernetic warriors that could rival the Imperium's might if ever unleashed. The question isn't just whether the Mechanicus could rebel, but whether it would. As long as the Imperium remains strong, Mars has little reason to risk open war. But the Imperium is not as strong as it once was. It is fractured, beset on all sides by enemies, slowly crumbling under the weight of endless war. If the Mechanicus ever decides that the Imperium is no longer worth preserving, that it is better off forging its own path, then the unthinkable could happen, the first true war between Mars and Terra. And if that day comes, the Imperium may find that its greatest ally has become its deadliest enemy. When discussing the potential for a war between Mars and Terra, one of the most critical questions is whether the Adeptus Mechanicus has the military strength to challenge the Imperium. Many assume that, despite its vast technological power, the Mechanicus could never hope to match the sheer numbers and resources of the Imperium. But that assumption might be dangerously flawed. The truth is, the Mechanicus doesn't fight like the rest of the Imperium. It fights smarter, more efficiently, and with weapons that make even the most hardened Imperial generals uneasy. If war were to break out, it wouldn't be a matter of brute force, but of devastating technological superiority versus overwhelming numbers. The Skitarii legions are the Mechanicus's primary fighting force, and they are unlike any conventional army in the Imperium. These cybernetic warriors are not just soldiers, they are living weapons, augmented and enhanced for war in ways that no ordinary human could survive. Unlike the Astra Militarum, which relies on massed infantry and armored divisions, the Skitarii are a precision force, equipped with some of the most advanced weaponry in the galaxy. Arc rifles that can fry a man inside his power armor, transuranic arquebuses capable of sniping targets from miles away, radium carbines that slowly poison everything they touch. The Skitarii fight with weapons that would be considered heretical in any other Imperial faction. And perhaps most terrifying of all, they are not just willing but eager to die in battle, knowing that their consciousness and combat data will be uploaded into the Omnissiah's vast network for future generations of warriors to use. But the Skitarii are only the tip of the spear. Behind them march the Titans, true gods of war. The Collegia Titanica is the most powerful land-based military force in the Imperium, fielding the towering war machines that can annihilate entire cities in a single salvo. Warhound Scouts, Reaver Titans, Warlords, and the dreaded Imperator-class Titans, each one a walking fortress, each one nearly impossible to destroy without an entire army. These are not simple weapons. They are relics of a forgotten era, imbued with machine spirits that grow more dangerous with every battle. If Mars were to turn against the Imperium, the Titan legions alone could be enough to shift the balance of power. And then there are the servitors, the mindless cybernetic thralls that perform the Mechanicus' will. Normally seen as nothing more than menial laborers or battlefield support units, the true potential of servitor-based warfare is terrifying. Imagine legions of gun servitors, tirelessly advancing without fear, immune to pain, immune to morale breaks. Imagine combat servitors, enhanced with deadly melee weaponry, tearing through Imperial lines with the efficiency of programmed killing machines. The Mechanicus doesn't see soldiers as individuals, they see them as units, as assets to be deployed and replaced as needed. While the Imperium sends flesh and blood to die in the trenches, the Mechanicus could send wave after wave of disposable cybernetic killing machines. Perhaps the greatest threat the Mechanicus poses isn't just its military might, but its ability to fight on its own terms. Unlike the Imperium, which is vast but sluggish, bogged down by bureaucratic inefficiencies and slow-moving battle doctrines, the Mechanicus thrives on cold, calculated efficiency. It doesn't waste resources. It maximizes them. It doesn't fight wars of attrition. It ends conflicts before they can truly begin. The tech priests of Mars have access to weapons and technologies that the Imperium has only begun to understand, and while much of that knowledge is hidden away, it's unlikely that Mars would hold back if its very survival were at stake. This raises the question, how ready is the Imperium for a potential Mechanicus rebellion? On paper, the Imperium holds the numerical advantage. The Astra Militarum alone fields billions of troops, with untold millions of tanks, aircraft, and warships spread across the galaxy. The Adeptus Astartes, while fewer in number, are unmatched in their tactical skill and individual prowess. The Imperial Navy dominates the stars, with fleets capable of leveling entire planets if necessary. And of course, there is the ultimate trump card, the Inquisition. If war ever seemed likely, it's entirely possible that the Inquisition would preemptively move to wipe out key figures in the Mechanicus before they could act. But numbers aren't everything. The Imperium may have a vast army, but it's spread thin, constantly fighting wars on multiple fronts, constantly losing ground to Xenos, heretics, and the forces of chaos. The Mechanicus, on the other hand, is concentrated. Mars itself is a fortress world unlike any other, with layers upon layers of defenses, hidden weapons, and a planetary infrastructure designed to withstand the worst. If Mars were to rebel, the Imperium wouldn't just be fighting an enemy, it would be fighting an enemy entrenched in the very heart of its empire. This is where fan theories get truly interesting. Some believe that if the Mechanicus ever rebelled, it wouldn't be an all-out war but a series of surgical strikes, key forges going dark, entire fleets turning against their masters, Imperial forces suddenly finding their war machines refusing to function. Others speculate that Mars already has contingencies in place, that the Omnissiah's true faithful have been planning for centuries, waiting for the right moment to act. And then there's the most radical theory of all, that the Mechanicus has already won. That the Imperium, in its ignorance, has been dancing to Mars's tune for millennia, unaware that it is nothing more than a puppet, a temporary tool to be discarded when the time is right. Could the Imperium crush a full-scale Mechanicus rebellion? Maybe. But at what cost? Could the Imperium survive if the Forge world shut down? If the flow of weapons, vehicles, and ammunition suddenly ceased? Could the Space Marines fight without their sacred war gear, without their gene seed maintenance, without the very tools that make them superhuman? The Imperium has faced countless threats in its history, but a war with Mars would be something entirely different. It wouldn't just be a war of conquest or survival. It would be a war against the very foundation of Imperial power. For now, the status quo remains. The Imperium tolerates the Mechanicus's eccentricities, and the Mechanicus plays its role, biding its time, hoarding its secrets. But should that balance ever shift, should Mars ever decide that it no longer needs the Imperium, then the galaxy will bear witness to a war unlike any it has ever seen. And in that war, it may not be the Imperium that emerges victorious. If Mars were ever to rise against the Imperium, The big question isn't just whether they could win, but how they would do it. Would it be a dramatic, open war with titans marching across Imperial worlds and Skitarii legions battling Astra Militarum regiments? Or would it be something more subtle, a slow, creeping rebellion that the Imperium wouldn't even realize was happening until it was too late? Theories about a potential Mechanicus uprising are all over the place, but most fan discussions boil down to a few possible scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. One of the most commonly discussed possibilities is Mars fully separating from the Imperium and declaring itself an independent empire. The Adeptus Mechanicus already operates with a level of autonomy that no other Imperial faction enjoys. Unlike the Adeptus Astartes, who must obey the High Lords of Terra, or the Astra Militarum, which is under the strict control of the Administratum, the Mechanicus answers to no one but itself. If they ever decided that their so-called partnership with the Imperium was no longer beneficial, they could simply walk away. But would they? Some argue that the only thing keeping the Mechanicus loyal is the fact that the Imperium provides protection. Without the Astra Militarum and the Space Marines, the Forge worlds would be prime targets for every Xenos race in the galaxy. But others believe that Mars has been preparing for this moment for centuries, that the Fabricator General and his inner circle have secret fleets, hidden armies, and plans for an empire where the weak, ignorant rulers of Terra no longer hold any power over them. Imagine a technocratic state where efficiency and logic replace blind religious dogma, where knowledge is pursued without the limitations imposed by the ecclesiarchy. To some within the Mechanicus, this isn't rebellion, it's simply evolution, the next step in humanity's true destiny. But not all potential rebellions are so clean. Another nightmare scenario is the Mechanicus turning to darker forces for power. It's happened before. During the Horus Heresy, entire Forge worlds sided with the War Master, embracing the forbidden knowledge of chaos in exchange for unrestricted technological progress. The Dark Mechanicum still exists, hidden in the eye of terror, creating horrors that even the most radical tech priests would hesitate to call machines. What if Mars decided to follow that path again? What if, in their endless quest for understanding, they finally broke all the seals, ignored all the warnings, and embraced the one thing they've been dancing around for millennia? True, unrestricted AI, free-willed machines that think and act beyond human control? To the Imperium, this would be heresy beyond measure, but to some within the Mechanicus, it would be the ultimate ascension. And then there's the even more terrifying idea. What if Mars didn't just fall to chaos, but willingly allied with Xenos races like the Tau? The Tau Empire has already shown a disturbing interest in the Mechanicus' technology, and the Mechanicus, for all their disdain for aliens, has an even greater interest in technological advancement. A secret alliance between a radical Forge world and the Tau could result in innovations that would shatter the Imperium's technological stagnation. Of course, such an alliance wouldn't last. Eventually, the Tau and the Mechanicus would turn on each other, but by the time the Imperium realized what was happening, it might already be too late. Then there's the possibility that Mars wouldn't go for a direct rebellion at all. Why fight a war when you can simply let your enemy crumble from within? The Mechanicus already controls nearly every aspect of Imperial infrastructure. Without them, there are no ships, no weapons, no tanks, no power, no functioning cities. If the Mechanicus decided to quietly sabotage the Imperium, it wouldn't take much. A few delayed shipments here, a few malfunctions there, a few key forges suddenly ceasing production due to technical difficulties. And suddenly, the entire Imperial war machine grinds to a halt. Some fan theories even suggest that this is already happening. Have you ever noticed how the Imperium always seems to be on the verge of collapse, no matter how many victories it wins? How technology keeps degrading, how resources are always running low? What if this isn't just the natural decay of a vast empire, but a deliberate effort by certain factions within the Mechanicus to weaken the Imperium, to create a slow but unstoppable decline that will eventually leave Mars as the only true power left. It's a terrifying thought, but not an impossible one. And then there's perhaps the most chaotic and unpredictable possibility of all, a civil war within the Mechanicus itself. The Adeptus Mechanicus is not a unified entity. It's a sprawling, fractured collection of forged worlds, each with its own rulers, agendas, and interpretations of the machine god's will. Some are fiercely loyal to the Imperium, believing that the Emperor and the Omnissiah are one and the same. Others see the Imperium as a necessary evil, tolerable only because it allows them to continue their work. And then there are the radicals, the ones who believe that the Imperium is a prison, that true enlightenment can only come once they are free of its outdated restrictions. If war ever broke out between Mars and Terra, there's a good chance it wouldn't be a clean conflict. It would be a messy, chaotic struggle with different forged worlds choosing different sides. Some might remain loyal, others might rebel, and some might simply retreat into isolation, waiting to see who comes out on top before making their move. The result wouldn't just be a war between the Imperium and the Mechanicus. It would be a war within the Mechanicus itself, a battle between those who cling to the old ways and those who seek to break free. No matter which scenario you believe in, one thing is certain. The Adeptus Mechanicus holds the keys to the Imperium's survival. If they ever decided to rise up, it wouldn't be a simple rebellion. It would be a fundamental shift in the balance of power, a moment that could redefine the future of the galaxy. The question isn't just if Mars will turn against the Imperium, but when. And when that day comes, the Imperium may find that its greatest ally has become its most dangerous enemy. If the Adeptus Mechanicus were ever to turn against the Imperium, the one institution that would move against them first, perhaps even before Terra itself, would be the Inquisition. The secretive, all-seeing enforcers of the Imperium's will have spent millennia weaving their networks into every major organization, and the cult Mechanicus is no exception. The big question, though, is how much control they really have over Mars. Some believe the Inquisition has countless sleeper agents embedded within the Mechanicus, tech priests who secretly serve the Inquisition and report on potential heresies. Others argue that the Inquisition is actually far more blind than it would like to admit, that the Mechanicus's isolationist tendencies and labyrinthine hierarchy make it almost impossible to truly infiltrate. After all, a forged world is not a typical imperial institution. It operates with a level of secrecy and autonomy that even the most paranoid inquisitor would struggle to penetrate. There's also the issue of how the Inquisition would act if they suspected a full-scale rebellion was brewing. Unlike the Ecclesiarchy, which sees the Mechanicus as dangerously heretical, or the Astra Militarum, which largely ignores them unless they refuse to supply weapons, the Inquisition understands that the Imperium needs the Mechanicus. Without their technology, the Imperium would grind to a halt overnight. This means that even if they uncovered undeniable proof that Mars was preparing to break away, they couldn't just declare a war of extermination the way they would against a chaos cult or a Xenos infiltrator. Instead, they would have to act with precision, assassinating key figures, spreading disinformation, and turning factions against each other to prevent a unified rebellion. Some theorists believe that the Inquisition already has multiple contingency plans in place to neutralize the Mechanicus should they ever attempt to betray the Imperium. There are whispers of Black Ops teams trained to assassinate senior magi, of cyber warfare contingencies that could shut down entire forged worlds, and even of hidden fail-safes buried deep in the machine code of the Imperium's most sacred technology, programmed weaknesses that could be exploited if the Mechanicus ever dared to rise up. If these theories are true, it would mean that the Inquisition has been preparing for this war for centuries, knowing that it's not a question of if Mars will rebel, but when. But even with all these measures, would the Imperium actually be able to stop a full-scale Mechanicus uprising? Militarily, it would be one of the most devastating conflicts in Imperial history. A direct assault on Mars would be almost unthinkable. The Red Planet is the most fortified world in the Sol system, second only to Terra itself. Countless orbital defenses, Titan legions, and Skitarii forces stand ready to annihilate any invading force. Even if the Imperium mustered the full might of the Imperial Navy and the Astra Militarum, an assault on Mars would be a logistical and strategic nightmare. And that's assuming other Forge worlds wouldn't immediately rise up in support of Mars, turning what was once a single-world rebellion into a full-scale civil war. That's why some fans believe that, rather than going for open warfare, the Imperium would attempt to wage a cold war against the Mechanicus, using economic and political pressure to keep them in check. The Imperium does have ways to hurt the Mechanicus without firing a shot. After all, the Astra Militarum and the Space Marines are the Mechanicus's biggest customers. If Terra ever decided to cut them off, refusing to send raw materials or troops to defend their Forge worlds, it could cripple the Mechanicus's ability to function. Of course, this strategy has its own risks. If Mars felt they were being economically strangled, they might respond by accelerating their plans for rebellion, potentially triggering the very war the Imperium was trying to avoid. And then there's the question of internal divisions. The cult Mechanicus is not a unified entity. There are many Forge worlds that are fiercely loyal to the Imperium, while others lean toward independence. Some fans theorize that if Mars ever attempted to break away, the Imperium would immediately try to turn these loyalist Forge worlds into counterweights, using them to keep the more rebellious elements in check. It's even possible that, if war seemed inevitable, the Inquisition would attempt to trigger a civil war within the Mechanicus itself, pitting loyalist tech priests against radicals in a brutal war of attrition. By the time the dust settled, Mars might still be standing, but it would be so weakened that it would no longer pose a real threat to Imperial rule. At the end of the day, the Imperium's biggest advantage in this potential conflict isn't its military might, its economic influence, or even the Inquisition's shadowy control. It's the fact that the Mechanicus needs the Imperium just as much as the Imperium needs them. The Imperium may rely on the Mechanicus for technology, but the Mechanicus relies on the Imperium for protection, manpower, and resources. If a true rebellion ever broke out, both sides would suffer unimaginable losses, and that alone may be the one thing preventing war. For now, Mars remains part of the Imperium. But the cracks in the alliance are already visible, and if those cracks ever widen into open conflict, it will be nothing short of apocalyptic. Diplomacy in the 41st millennium is a delicate matter, if not outright hopeless. The relationship between Terra and Mars has always been strained, marked by mutual distrust, ideological differences, and conflicting ambitions. However, even the most deep-seated conflicts don't necessarily have to end in war. Is there a way for the Imperium and the Adeptus Mechanicus to find common ground if tensions reach a boiling point? Could both sides avoid a devastating civil war? Some fans argue that diplomacy is nothing more than an illusion, a temporary measure to maintain the status quo. They believe the divide between the Imperium and Mars has already reached a breaking point, and it's only a matter of time before it manifests as open conflict. Others, however, suggest that both sides recognize their interdependence as the glue holding them together. Without the technological might of Mars, the Imperium would struggle to maintain its vast war machine against countless external threats. At the same time, without the Imperium's protection and vast economic base, the Adeptus Mechanicus could be left vulnerable to invasion and internal collapse. If we examine the mechanisms of diplomacy, it's clear that even within the rigid structure of the Imperium, negotiations do have a place. The Lord Commander of the Imperium and the Fabricator General of Mars each wield considerable influence, and neither would rush into open confrontation without weighing the risks. The Lord Commander, even if he is a zealous warmonger, understands that a war with the Mechanicus could be disastrous, especially if it coincides with other crises. On the other hand, the Fabricator General knows that open rebellion could result in Mars being obliterated should the Imperium muster enough force to crush it. A major question among fans is the role of the autonomous Forge worlds. While Mars is the heart of the Adeptus Mechanicus, Many Forge worlds maintain a degree of independence and may not necessarily side with either faction in the event of a conflict. Some could remain loyal to the Imperium, others might align with Mars, and still others could take advantage of the chaos to secure greater autonomy for themselves. This creates a complex political landscape where both sides would have to carefully choose their allies. Some theories suggest that peace is possible, but only as a temporary measure. For instance, the Imperium might offer Mars greater autonomy in exchange for continued military support, delaying a full-scale break but not preventing it altogether. Others believe that the Adeptus Mechanicus could use negotiations as a tactical pause, buying time to mobilize forces in secret only to strike when the Imperium is least prepared. The fundamental issue is that neither side sees the other as a true partner, but rather as a necessary evil. The Imperium views Mars as an unpredictable and untrustworthy ally, too valuable to destroy, yet too independent to fully control. Meanwhile, the Adeptus Mechanicus sees the Imperium as an archaic, stagnating force that stifles progress, but without which it would be vulnerable to external threats. So while negotiations may happen, their outcome would likely be unstable. Any peaceful resolution, even if achieved, would only be a temporary compromise, one that merely postpones the inevitable. Mars and Terra are on divergent paths, and sooner or later, that divergence will lead to conflict. The only real question is when and under what circumstances the final break will occur. If Mars and Terra were to go to war, the shockwaves of that conflict would be felt across the entire galaxy. The Imperium is already a crumbling colossus, constantly besieged by enemies on all sides. A civil war between its two most powerful factions would be the perfect opportunity for those lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The question isn't whether external forces would intervene, but rather how they would exploit the chaos to further their own agendas. One of the most obvious threats in such a scenario is chaos. The Dark Mechanicum, long exiled from Mars and now thriving in the Eye of Terror, would seize the opportunity to spread its corruption. Many within the Adeptus Mechanicus already dabble in forbidden knowledge, and the temptation of unfettered technological advancement, unshackled from the dogma of the cult Mechanicus, could turn some of them towards the ruinous powers. A civil war could open the floodgates for traitors, leading to a full-scale schism that mirrors the Horus heresy, but this time centered on the Forge worlds rather than the Space Marine legions. If the Imperium were to respond by purging suspected heretics, it could drive even more tech priests into the arms of chaos, fueling a self-perpetuating cycle of rebellion and destruction. The Tau Empire, ever opportunistic, would likely view the conflict as a chance to expand their influence. While they lack the firepower to take on Mars directly, they are masters of diplomacy and subterfuge. If certain Forge worlds sought independence from both Mars and Terra, the Tau might offer them advanced technology, logistical support, or even military protection in exchange for an alliance. This could lead to the birth of rogue Mechanicus enclaves, creating an entirely new faction that operates outside of both the Imperium and the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Tau philosophy of progress and innovation could be appealing to certain radical tech priests who chafe under the restrictive doctrines of the machine cult. Some fans speculate that if a faction of the Mechanicus were to truly embrace technological progress without the constraints of faith, it would surpass even the Tau in scientific advancements. Then there are the Necrons, ancient and calculating. A war between Mars and Terra could weaken the Imperium's control over the galaxy's technological infrastructure, giving the Necron dynasties an opening to reclaim lost tomb worlds. Mars itself harbors long-buried Necron secrets, and if the planet were destabilized, it could lead to an awakening of hidden forces. There's also the question of whether certain tech priests, particularly those of the Xenorite faction, might attempt to form an alliance with the Necrons in pursuit of their technological secrets. While such a union seems unlikely due to the Necrons' disdain for organic life, there's always the possibility that desperate individuals within the Mechanicus might try to bargain with forces far beyond their comprehension. The Eldar, both Craftworld and Dark, would no doubt manipulate events to serve their own ends. The Craftworld Eldar might seek to subtly nudge the conflict in a way that minimizes the long-term damage to the galaxy, possibly by assassinating key figures or spreading misinformation to prolong the war. The Dark Eldar, on the other hand, would revel in the suffering, launching raids on weakened Forge worlds to capture new slaves and steal exotic technology. Some fans have even speculated that the Inari, with their belief in Aenead's resurrection, might view a Mechanicus civil war as a way to accelerate the death and rebirth cycle they seek. Perhaps the most terrifying possibility, however, is the involvement of the Tyranids. The Fourth Tyrannic War is already looming on the horizon, and if the Imperium were to weaken itself with an internal conflict, it could create the perfect opening for Hive Fleet Leviathan or a new Splinter Fleet to strike. Some theories suggest that the Tyranids adapt their strategies based on the state of their prey. If they detect weakness in the Imperium, they might accelerate their invasion, sensing an opportunity to consume a divided empire. Worse still, what if Mars itself became a target? The sheer concentration of biomass, machine components, and strategic value on the Red Planet would make it a prime objective for the hive mind. In the end, a war between Mars and Terra wouldn't just be an internal struggle. It would be a catastrophe that reshapes the entire balance of power in the galaxy. Every external faction would find a way to turn the chaos to their advantage, whether through subversion, direct invasion, or technological theft. While some argue that the Imperium is too vast to ever fully collapse, history has shown that even the mightiest empires can fall when they are torn apart from within. The Adeptus Mechanicus may not yet have made its final decision, but if the day comes when Mars turns against the Imperium, the true victors of the conflict might not be human at all. The Adeptus Mechanicus has always been an enigma within the Imperium. While the rest of the Imperium clings to stagnation, bound by dogma and fear of progress, the tech priests of Mars continue their relentless pursuit of knowledge, albeit in their own cryptic and often secretive way. The question that has haunted many fans of Warhammer 40K for years is simple. Does the Adeptus Mechanicus truly need the Imperium anymore? Has Mars already built something far beyond what the Imperium can comprehend, hidden behind layers of secrecy and religious fervor? There are plenty of signs suggesting that the Mechanicus, if it wished, could break away and forge its own independent empire. The Forge worlds scattered across the galaxy operate with a level of autonomy unmatched by nearly any other Imperial faction. Many of them communicate more with Mars than with Terra, and some of the more distant Forge worlds barely acknowledge the Imperium's authority at all. Their industrial might is unparalleled, entire planets devoted to churning out tanks, warships, titans, and untold numbers of weapons. While the Imperium provides them with resources and protection, one has to wonder, has Mars already created a self-sustaining empire in the shadows? One of the biggest potential threats that could allow the Adeptus Mechanicus to break free is their hoarding of forbidden technologies. The Imperium bans artificial intelligence, but the Mechanicus holds a deep fascination with the machines of the Dark Age of technology. There are countless rumors that some Forge worlds are secretly experimenting with AI, despite the threat of exterminatus should they be caught. If even one of these experiments bore fruit, the Mechanicus could create a technological force unlike anything seen since the Men of Iron. Imagine an army of completely autonomous war machines, capable of adapting and learning without the need for human oversight. Such an army would be devastatingly efficient, possibly even superior to the mindless servitors and Skitarii currently fielded by the Mechanicus. There is also the question of xenotech. The Mechanicus outwardly despises alien technology, considering it heretical, but in practice, they have been known to study and even incorporate forbidden alien advancements. The Xenorites, a radical sect within the Mechanicus, believe that the pursuit of knowledge should not be limited to human discoveries. If these radicals were to gain power, they could push the Mechanicus into a new era of development, unchained from the Imperium's restrictive decrees. Some fans speculate that hidden deep within the vaults of Mars, there may already be advanced weapons and machines derived from Necron, Eldar, or even Tau technology, devices far beyond what the rest of the Imperium can imagine. But the most disturbing possibility of all is the idea that the Adeptus Mechanicus may one day abandon humanity altogether. Many tech priests already replace so much of their organic bodies with machinery that they are barely human anymore. What if this process were taken to its logical extreme? There are whispers that the most extreme sects within the Mechanicus see flesh as nothing more than a temporary inconvenience, a relic of a primitive past that must be cast aside. If Mars were to fully embrace this ideology, the entire faction could undergo a form of technological ascension, transforming into something beyond human comprehension. Would they become a new kind of synthetic life form, freed from the weaknesses of flesh? Would they seek to upload their consciousness into a vast digital network, achieving immortality in a way no human has before? If the Adeptus Mechanicus truly has the means to stand apart from the Imperium, then the only thing stopping them is their own divided nature. Some factions, like the conservative Fabricator General and his loyalists, might still see value in remaining tied to Terra. Others, like the radical Xenorites or those experimenting with AI, may already be making plans for a future where Mars stands alone. The real question is not whether the Mechanicus could survive without the Imperium, but whether they want to. If Mars ever decides to reveal the full extent of its technological capabilities, it could shake the entire foundation of the Imperium. Some believe that the only reason they haven't already broken away is that they are simply biding their time, waiting for the right moment. And if that moment ever comes, the Imperium may finally realize that its greatest ally was also its most dangerous threat all along. The idea of a full-scale war between the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Imperium is one of the most terrifying scenarios imaginable. The sheer devastation that such a conflict would unleash is difficult to comprehend. Mars, the beating heart of Imperial industry, turned into a war zone. Forge worlds across the galaxy, choosing sides, plunging entire star systems into chaos. Billions, maybe even trillions, dying as the Imperium and Mechanicus unleash every weapon in their arsenals against one another. But when the dust settles, who would be left standing on the ruins of Mars? If the Adeptus Mechanicus were to win and successfully break free from the Imperium, it would be a cataclysmic shift in the balance of power across the galaxy. The Imperium relies on the Mechanicus for almost everything: its weapons, ships, armor, even its basic infrastructure. Without the Forge worlds, the Imperium would begin to rot from the inside, its war machine grinding to a halt. A victorious Mars would likely establish itself as the core of a new, independent technocracy, one ruled entirely by logic and the pursuit of knowledge rather than imperial dogma. But what would this new faction look like? Would they remain coldly pragmatic, merely focusing on their survival? Or would they become something even more radical, embracing forbidden technologies and reshaping themselves into something entirely post-human? Some fans speculate that a victorious Mechanicus could even become a new superpower, rivaling the Imperium, Chaos, or the Necrons. If Mars were to unlock the full potential of its technological might, it could surpass anything seen in the Imperium's current stagnation. An independent Adeptus Mechanicus could rebuild the weapons of the Dark Age of technology, create fleets of self-replicating war machines, and potentially even challenge the Imperium's hold over humanity. Some theories suggest that a Mechanicus-led empire would resemble the cybernetic hegemony that existed before the Age of Strife, a terrifyingly advanced machine civilization that once ruled vast portions of the galaxy before collapsing under its own hubris. But what if the Imperium won? The consequences of Mars's defeat would be just as extreme. The Mechanicus is too deeply embedded in the Imperium's structure to simply be reintegrated if they lost. There would be no forgiveness, no peaceful resolution. The cult Mechanicus would be shattered, its leadership executed or purged, its rebellious Forge worlds bombed into submission or outright destroyed. The Inquisition, already distrustful of the Mechanicus, would take full control of what remained, stripping away much of their autonomy and ensuring they would never be able to threaten the Imperium again. This could mean the end of the Adeptus Mechanicus as we know it. No more secret research, no more hidden experiments with AI or xenotech, just another branch of the Imperium forced into complete compliance. Of course, the loss of the Mechanicus would also come at an enormous cost for the Imperium. Even if Mars was crushed, the rest of the galaxy wouldn't just sit by and watch. Chaos, the Tau Empire, and even the Necrons could see an opportunity in the Imperium's weakness. If Terra committed all its forces to subduing the Mechanicus, it might find itself too exhausted to stop an invasion from an external threat. And what if the war escalated to the point where Exterminatus became a viable option? Would the Imperium really destroy Mars, the very world where the Emperor first forged his alliance with the Mechanicus, just to stop a rebellion? If so, how many Forge worlds would survive to carry on the Mechanicus's legacy? Perhaps the most interesting possibility is that neither side truly wins. Instead, the war grinds on for centuries, with Mars and its allies fighting a desperate guerrilla war while the Imperium struggles to maintain control. Imagine an entire segmentum engulfed in conflict, with rogue Forge worlds operating as independent warlords, hidden Mechanicus enclaves building new machines of war in deep space, and the Imperium constantly trying to suppress an enemy that refuses to die. No matter which way the war ends, one thing is clear: the galaxy would never be the same. The Imperium without the Mechanicus would be a wounded giant lurching toward collapse, while the Mechanicus without the Imperium would be an unchained beast, free to pursue its own evolution without limits. Whether that future would bring salvation or destruction, however, remains one of the greatest questions in Warhammer 40k. A war between Mars and Terra wouldn't just be another conflict in the Imperium's bloody history, it would be an event that reshapes the entire galaxy. The Adeptus Mechanicus isn't just another faction within the Imperium. It's the very foundation upon which the Imperium stands. If that foundation cracks, the entire empire could come crashing down. But what happens in the long term? Would the Imperium recover, or would this be the beginning of a slow and inevitable decline into another dark age? One of the most immediate consequences of such a war would be the sheer technological collapse that would follow. The Imperium is already struggling to maintain its technology, relying on rituals and half-forgotten knowledge to keep its war machines running. If Mars were to secede, or worse, be destroyed, the loss of expertise would be catastrophic. Yes, there are thousands of Forge worlds across the galaxy, but none possess the sheer concentration of knowledge and industrial power that Mars does. Without the heart of the Mechanicus, entire sectors could fall into ruin as their ships, weapons, and infrastructure degrade beyond repair. Some fans theorize that this would push humanity into a slow technological death spiral, where more and more systems fall into regression until the Imperium is little more than a collection of feudal warlords fighting over scraps of working technology. If the war drags on for centuries, another possibility emerges: the Imperium splitting into multiple factions. Imagine a divided humanity, with one empire ruled from Terra, bound to the traditions of the Emperor, while another, led by Mars, embraces a future of technological dominance. There might even be smaller breakaway states, Forge worlds that declare independence, planetary governors who see an opportunity to seize power for themselves, or even rogue Astartes chapters, forced to choose between loyalty to the Emperor or to the machines that arm them. In many ways, this could mirror the Age of Strife, where humanity was scattered and fragmented before the Emperor's Great Crusade. The difference now is that there is no Emperor to unify them again. But there's also the terrifying possibility that this war could trigger a second dark age of technology. The first one was brought about by mankind's over-reliance on artificial intelligence, which led to a devastating war against the Men of Iron. What if this new war, fought with every secret weapon the Mechanicus has hidden away, unleashes something just as catastrophic? Forbidden technologies could be deployed, like fully sentient AI, cybernetic plagues, or planet-cracking weapons capable of reducing entire worlds to ash. Some fans speculate that the Mechanicus, if pushed to the brink, might finally break the ancient taboo against artificial intelligence, unleashing new horrors upon the galaxy. If that happens, the Imperium's worst nightmare could become a reality, a second war against machines, one that could make even the horrors of the Horus Heresy look tame in comparison. And then, of course, there's the rest of the galaxy. No faction exists in a vacuum, and the Imperium's enemies would not sit idly by while Mars and Terra tear each other apart. Chaos would undoubtedly seek to exploit the conflict, whispering into the ears of radical tech priests, tempting them with knowledge the Imperium has long forbidden. The Tau Empire, always eager to expand, might attempt to forge an alliance with breakaway Forge worlds, offering them freedom from the Imperium's oppression in exchange for technology. The Necrons, ancient masters of the material universe, might see an opportunity to finally wipe out the last vestiges of human technological progress. And worst of all, the Tyranids might sense the instability and strike with full force, consuming what remains of humanity while it is too weak to resist. Some fans argue that a schism between Mars and Terra wouldn't necessarily be the end of humanity. It could be the beginning of something new. If the Mechanicus breaks away, it might finally break free of the dogmatic stagnation of the Imperium, unlocking new scientific advancements that could propel humanity forward. Perhaps in time, Mars and Terra could reconcile, forming a new, more advanced Imperium, one that blends the Emperor's vision with true technological progress. Others believe this is wishful thinking, that without the Imperium's oppressive rule, the Mechanicus would spiral into its own form of madness, abandoning humanity entirely in favor of pure machine ascension. Regardless of the outcome, one thing is certain: a war between Mars and Terra would be a defining moment in the history of Warhammer 40K. Whether it leads to humanity's rebirth or its final collapse, the echoes of such a conflict would be felt across the stars for millennia to come. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more deep dives and theories about the Warhammer 40K universe.